As the international break winds down, Celtic supporters are shifting their focus back to club matters, and there's plenty to unpack as the team prepares to return to action. Let's start with the situation surrounding Benji Negron, who once again was left out of Sweden's lineup during this international window. Not a single minute on the pitch, which, from his personal point of view, must be incredibly frustrating, especially considering Sweden's disastrous run in World Cup qualifying. 1 point out of a possible 12 and back-to-back defeats against Kosovo. That's a national team in free fall. You'd think a change might be coming, but for now, Negron remains on the outside looking in. Still, from a Celtic perspective, it's not the worst thing. He's avoided the physical demands of competitive matches and will return to Glasgow rested and hopefully ready to push for a stronger showing at Dens Park on Sunday. Elsewhere, there's been a small but encouraging update on Sebastian Tanecti. There were some concerns after he missed Tunisia's first international fixture, and it triggered some worry among the support. But in their second match of the break, against Namibia, Tanecti not only featured but actually started on the right wing, playing the full first half before being subbed at the interval. Tunisia had already qualified for the World Cup with flying colors, not even conceding a single goal through their campaign, so the match itself didn't carry much significance. That makes the early substitution likely just a case of load management after his recent knock. So the takeaway here is largely positive. He's back in action, and assuming no setbacks, he should be in contention to feature at Dens Park. Now, one name that continues to loom large in terms of uncertainty is Daisen Maida. He pulled out of the Japanese squad before their matches, and so far, there's been radio silence from both the Japanese camp and Celtic themselves. We've had no substantial update about the nature or severity of his injury, other than some suggestions that it involves the left foot or lower leg. As things stand, all eyes are on Brendan Rodgers' upcoming press conference. That's when we'll likely get a clearer picture of Maida's availability. If he doesn't make it, that's a big piece missing, not just because of his work rate, but because of the tactical flexibility he offers out wide. Speaking of returning faces, fans will be glad to know that Alistair Johnston is back in full training at Lennoxtown. It's been 8 weeks since that hamstring tear he picked up in the first leg against Kairat, but the good news is he's finally reintegrating with the squad. That injury feels like it happened in another era. So much has unfolded in these past 2 months that it's almost hard to believe it's only been that long. Back then, there was a real sense of optimism around the squad. Since then, things have turned turbulent with inconsistent performances and questions building around Rodgers' best 11. So Johnston returning isn't just a boost for the right-back position. It's a shot in the arm for the entire team's morale. Now, while nobody expects Johnston to start immediately, especially not after that kind of injury, the hope is that he can get some minutes off the bench this Sunday. With major fixtures on the horizon against the likes of Sturmgrass, Hearts, Rangers, and Midtjylland, the goal will be to reintegrate him carefully, but effectively. In the meantime, young Kobe Donovan is expected to hold down the fort at right back. He's currently away with Scotland's under-21s, but there's growing belief among fans that he deserves more regular opportunities. If the match against Dundee goes to plan, we might see Johnston coming on for the final half hour, a scenario that would suit everyone involved. But Johnston's return also raises bigger questions about Celtic's ideal starting 11. Questions that, frankly, haven't had clear answers all season. Rodgers appears to still be figuring things out, which is surprising given how settled the team was at this point last year. Injuries have played a role, no doubt, but there's also been inconsistency in individual performances and rotation in key positions. That said, now that Johnston is back, you can begin to visualize what might become the spine of this Celtic team. In the bigger games, you'd expect to see a core group: Kasper Schmeichel in goal, a backline of Johnston, Carter Vickers, Scales, and Kieran Tierney, with Callum McGregor sitting just in front. That's a fairly solid defensive base. On the left, Sebastian Tanecti could find a more permanent home, and leading the line up top, Kelechi Iheanacho looks likely to be the main man. But that still leaves a few big question marks, especially in midfield and on the right wing. The right side of the attack, in particular, remains a conundrum. Do you go with Maida there? He's probably the best option available, but his recent performances on that flank have been underwhelming. And it's fair to ask whether that's down to Maida himself or the fact that he's simply being played out of position. If not him, then who? Young hasn't convinced. James Forrest isn't a long-term solution, and Benji Negron, while occasionally promising, hasn't looked comfortable operating as a traditional right-winger. There's been some suggestion that Negron could be more effective with Johnston overlapping, allowing him to cut inside. But that feels more like speculative optimism than a tactical breakthrough. Even Balisha has been tried there, with little success. He looked out of sorts the one time he featured on the right, particularly in that disappointing outing at Rugby Park. Interestingly, Tanecti's role with Tunisia opens another potential avenue. Playing on the right wing in that match, he showed enough to suggest he could fill the gap if needed. Even though his preferred position is on the left, his willingness to adapt might prove valuable. And down the line, if Maida returns to the left or Balisha finds consistency, the right side could be available for someone like Tanecti to claim. There's also the looming prospect of Hoda coming back into the mix later in the season, though that's still some way off. Now, midfield is a whole different headache. It's an area where Celtic have struggled to find rhythm and creativity. There's been talk about giving Ari Engels a more prominent role, and honestly, it might be time. Yes, he's been underwhelming at times, but he did play a vital part in the winning goal against Motherwell, picking out Balisha with a sharp, incisive pass. The midfield has grown stale, and Rodgers might need to take a calculated gamble. Give Engels a run of games, hand him the responsibility, and see what he's truly capable of bringing to the engine room. Alongside Engels, one wildcard pick could be Balisha in a more central role. It's not as strange as it sounds. At Antwerp, he played centrally quite often, and based on his technical skill, quick feet in tight spaces, and ability to press high, he might offer a spark that's currently missing. He's already shown flashes of intelligence and control in those crowded middle areas. A trio of McGregor, Engels, and Balisha isn't the most conventional midfield setup, but it might inject some much-needed dynamism. Maybe it's not what you'd go with in a crunch tie against Rangers, but in matches where Celtic need to break down a low block, it could be exactly the kind of creative blend Rodgers is looking for. And yes, we hear the cries for Rio Hatate. On his day, Hatate is a game-changer. But let's be honest, he hasn't been on his day for a while. There's a growing sentiment that he might have already peaked in a Celtic shirt, and some fans wonder if his heart is still fully in it. Then there's Paulo Bernardo and David Turnbull, but neither has done enough recently to grab the role by the scruff of the neck. That's why a shake-up could be on the cards, and in Celtic's current form, maybe that's exactly what's needed. With all those lingering doubts about the midfield and wide areas, attention naturally shifts to Brendan Rodgers himself, because at the end of the day, these are decisions only he can make, and he's under real pressure now to find a formula that works. It's not just about putting out a starting 11 that looks good on paper. It's about building a unit that feels cohesive, that moves the ball with purpose, and that can handle both the physical and mental demands of the next few months. This upcoming stretch is going to define Celtic's season. It's not just domestic fixtures. We've got crucial European ties ahead, and if Celtic are to make any sort of meaningful impact beyond the Scottish Premiership, they need to settle on a core group and fast. And let's be clear, Rodgers has never really had that problem in his first spell in charge. Back then, you could name the starting 11 before the team sheet even dropped. Now, you're looking at 3 or 4 positions every week where it's genuinely up for debate. Part of that is down to injuries, yes, but part of it is because several players simply aren't performing to the levels expected of them. The energy, the intensity, the sharpness, so many of the things that defined Celtic's play in previous seasons have been missing in patches this year. That's why names like Ari Engels or even Balisha in midfield are being thrown around. Because if the more established options aren't delivering, then what's the harm in giving others a chance? There's also the reality that Celtic's fan base is getting restless. Supporters have been patient, more patient than usual, perhaps, because of the transitional nature of this season. But that patience is wearing thin, especially when you see the same issues crop up week after week. Lack of cutting edge in the final third. Passiveness in midfield. Defensive lapses that feel avoidable. These aren't new problems. They're recurring themes, and that's the sort of thing that puts pressure on a manager fast in a club like Celtic. What doesn't help matters is the feeling that the board isn't doing enough behind the scenes either. There's a sense that the club has become a little too comfortable, a little too content with domestic dominance, without truly pushing the envelope in Europe. You hear it in the conversations among fans at pubs, outside the stadium, on message boards. There's frustration that the club talks a big game, but isn't always acting like a modern, top-level football institution. And that's where things start to bleed into the wider issues, beyond just what's happening on the pitch. Take the fixture announcements this week. The television selections dropped and, predictably, caused a bit of a stir. The standout one is that Saturday night kickoff away at St. Mirren. 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. It's an unusual slot for Scottish football, and it's one that immediately divided opinion. From a broadcast perspective, sure, it might make sense. It's prime time, it's got that spotlight appeal. But from a supporter's perspective, especially for those traveling, it's far from ideal. It's yet another reminder that the match-going fan is rarely the priority in these decisions. Last season's trip to Tanecti fell on the exact same weekend and time slot. And while Celtic walked away with a dominant win, the logistics around it were anything but smooth for the support. That said, you know the fans will still travel. They always do. That's never been in question. Whether it's midday on a Sunday or late on a Saturday, the Celtic end is packed. But that doesn't mean they're happy about it. It's just part of the ongoing struggle between tradition and modern football's obsession with squeezing every ounce of commercial value out of the game. And to some extent, you can understand the frustration. Because when you couple that with how the board has handled things off the pitch lately, it starts to feel like the support is being taken for granted. Nowhere is that more apparent than in the latest batch of merchandise announcements. More Adidas gear, more Celtic-branded items, more chances to spend money. This time it's the Special range, teased recently at a home game, complete with green suede trainers and new apparel drops. And sure, it looks sharp, but timing is everything. Dropping new merch in the middle of growing unrest among fans about the club's direction feels, at best, tone-deaf. At worst, it feels like a cash grab. Before we proceed, subscribe to our channel and enable notifications to receive all exclusive news about Celtic FC. Don't miss any details about your favorite team. It's extremely important for Celtic FC fans. The Celtic Park corridors are buzzing with whispers after what insiders are calling one of the tensest confrontations in recent memory. Brendan Rodgers, the Celtic manager, reportedly lashed out with the words, "He's not playing with me anymore," directed at Kyogo Furohashi. Sources close to the club say the exchange has left the squad stunned, and speculation is already running rampant across the Scottish football scene. Furohashi, the Japanese striker who has been pivotal for Celtic in recent campaigns, appears to have clashed with Rodgers over tactical disagreements and, according to insiders, a growing frustration with his playing time. While both parties have publicly maintained a professional facade, those within the dressing room suggest the atmosphere is far from harmonious. Team meetings have reportedly become tense, with staff quietly maneuvering to prevent the rift from spilling into training sessions. Fans on social media are already divided. Some argue that Rodgers' fiery temperament is nothing new and that Furohashi, though talented, has occasionally frustrated the manager with his style of play. Others fear this could mark the beginning of the end for the striker's Celtic career. Transfer gossip is already swirling, with whispers linking Furohashi to potential moves outside Scotland, even before the window officially opens. A few insiders hint that clubs in England and Japan are keeping a close eye on the situation, sensing a possible opportunity if the relationship truly sours. Adding fuel to the fire, unnamed sources claim that the tension isn't solely on the pitch. Rodgers reportedly believes that certain off-field distractions have affected Furohashi's focus, and the manager's patience, famously short when it comes to discipline and commitment, has apparently reached its limit. Whether this will lead to an official exclusion from upcoming matches or a behind-the-scenes resolution remains unclear, but the Celtic faithful are bracing for drama. Whatever transpires next, one thing is certain: the Celtic Park rumor mill is alive and kicking. For now, fans can only speculate whether this fiery exchange will be a brief storm or the start of a more permanent fracture. One thing is clear, though: Brendan Rodgers' words were no idle threat, and Kyogo Furohashi's next move could redefine the club's season. Hello, fan. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, as it means a lot to Celtic FC. Also, share your opinion about the news in the comments below. See you in the next video.